The alien girl waited 1,000 years, just to see him again. She stood at the observation window of her ship and watched the blue planet turn slowly beneath her, and the memories came flooding back like they always did when she returned to this system, and her name was Lyra. And she was not human, though she looked almost like one except for the silver patterns that traced across her skin like lightning, frozen in time. 1,000 years ago, she had been young and curious, and her people had sent her to study the primitive species that lived on the third planet from the yellow star, and they called themselves humans, and they were loud and messy and emotional in ways her people had forgotten centuries before, and she was supposed to observe them from a distance and take notes and return home with her data. But then she met him. His name was Daniel, and he was a pilot in something called the Air Force, and he had crashed his aircraft in a remote area where her scout ship had landed for repairs, and she should have let him die, or at least erased his memory. But when she found him bleeding and broken, something inside her that she did not know existed woke up, and she healed him. He opened his eyes and looked at her and smiled, despite the pain, and said, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." And she felt her heart, which she did not think could feel such things, begin to race. They had 6 months together. She told him everything about her people and how they lived for thousands of years, and how they had mastered technology beyond human imagination, but had lost something vital along the way. And he told her about love and art and music and all the things that made humans burn so brightly, even though they lived such short lives. He taught her to laugh, and she taught him to see the stars not as distant lights but as destinations waiting to be reached. And they fell in love in that small cabin hidden in the mountains, far from both their worlds. But her people found her eventually. They came for her in their great ships and told her she had broken every law and contaminated a developing species, and she had to leave immediately and never return, or they would destroy everything she had touched, including him. And she begged them for more time, but they gave her one day. She spent that last night with Daniel and tried to memorize everything about him, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, and the sound of his laugh and the warmth of his hand in hers. And he told her he understood and that he would wait for her. And she told him that was foolish because humans lived such short lives, and he said, "Then I will wait in whatever comes after." She left the next morning and did not look back, because if she had, she would have stayed and they would have killed him. Her people punished her by assigning her to the furthest edges of explored space and forbidding her from ever returning to Earth, and she accepted it because at least he would live. And she threw herself into her work and tried to forget, but she never could. Centuries passed. She watched civilizations rise and fall on distant worlds, and studied species that made humans look simple by comparison, and her people began to trust her again and gave her more freedom. But she did not feel free, because part of her heart remained on that blue planet with a man who had been dust for hundreds of years. Then everything changed when humans reached the stars. She heard about it from a trading post near the galactic rim, and at first she did not believe it because it had only been 800 years, and that was nothing. And species did not reach space that quickly, but the reports kept coming, and humans were spreading across the stars with the same messy enthusiasm they brought to everything. Her people were fascinated and alarmed in equal measure, because humans were doing things that should not be possible, and breaking rules of development that had held true for millions of years. And they were dangerous and unpredictable and absolutely refused to stay in the neat categories the galaxy used. Lyra requested permission to study them officially this time, and her superiors agreed because she had more experience with humans than anyone else living, and they needed someone who understood these strange creatures. She went to one of the human colonies first and walked among them wearing a disguise that hid her silver markings, and she listened to them talk and laugh and argue, and felt that old ache in her chest grow stronger because they reminded her so much of him. Then she heard someone mention a name in a bar, and her blood went cold. Daniel Hayes. The man at the bar was talking about his ancestor and a family legend about a man who claimed he met an alien in the mountains 1,000 years ago, and everyone thought he was crazy, but he insisted until the day he died that she was real and that she would come back. Lyra found herself moving before she thought about it and asking questions, and the man was happy to talk after a few drinks, and he showed her a picture on his datapad, and it was Daniel, and he looked exactly as she remembered him, and the man said his ancestor had left behind journals and drawings and even a few pieces of what he claimed was alien technology, though no one believed it. She asked where she could find these journals, and the man gave her an address on Earth, and she thanked him and left and booked passage on the next ship to humanity's homeworld. Earth had changed beyond recognition. The mountains where they had hidden were now covered in cities, and the sky was full of ships coming and going, and she felt lost in this new world that had grown up in her absence. But she found the address, and it was a museum dedicated to early human space exploration. The journals were there in a climate-controlled case. She stood in front of them for a long time, and people walked past her and did not notice the alien woman, crying silver tears as she read Daniel's handwriting preserved behind glass. He had written about her every day. He wrote about how she taught him to see the universe as something beautiful instead of frightening, and how she showed him that humanity was not alone, and that there were wonders waiting beyond their small planet. And he wrote that he hoped someone would read these words someday and continue the work of reaching for the stars. He died at 97 years old, according to the plaque, and he never married and spent his life working for the early space program, and his colleagues said he always seemed to be waiting for something. She wanted to scream. 1,000 years was nothing to her people, but it had been everything to him, and she had missed it all, and he had kept his promise and waited, and she had not been there. But then she found the last page. He had written it the day before he died, and his handwriting was shaky but still clear, and he wrote that he knew she would come back someday, because she promised, and he knew she kept her promises, and he wrote that he was not sad because he had lived a full life and helped humanity reach for the stars like she wanted, and he hoped that when she returned, she would see that humans had not wasted the gift she gave them. He wrote that he loved her and that love does not die just because the body does, and that he would find her again somehow, because the universe was strange and wonderful and full of impossible things. She left the museum and walked through the crowded streets of Earth and looked up at the stars that humans now traveled between, and she understood what Daniel had been trying to tell her in his last message. Love was not about time. Her people lived for thousands of years, but they had forgotten how to truly live, and they moved through the centuries like ghosts and never let themselves feel anything too deeply, because it hurt less that way, and she had been like them once. But Daniel had taught her that burning brightly for a short time was better than existing dimly forever, and that love was not foolish just because it ended, and that waiting was not wasted time, if you spent it working toward something beautiful. She returned to her ship and contacted her superiors and told them she was staying with the humans and studying them for as long as they would have her, and they argued, but she no longer cared what they thought. She became an official liaison between her people and humanity, and she helped humans understand the galaxy, and she helped the galaxy understand humans, and she was good at it because she had loved one of them, and she could explain why they did the impossible things they did. Years passed, and then decades, and then a century. She met Daniel's descendants and watched them grow and have children of their own, and she told them stories about their ancestor that were not in any history book, and they welcomed her as family. One day, a young man came to see her, and he had Daniel's eyes. His name was Marcus, and he was a historian, and he said he had been researching his family and found something strange in the genetic records, and he wanted to know if it was possible that she had given Daniel something when she healed him all those years ago. She looked at the data he showed her and felt her heart skip. Daniel's descendants lived longer than normal humans, and aged slower, and had better health. And it was subtle enough that no one had noticed for centuries, but it was there in the genetic code like a signature. She had not meant to do it. When she healed him that first day, she had simply poured her own energy into him to save his life, and some of that energy had rewritten pieces of his DNA and passed down through the generations. Marcus asked what it meant, and she told him the truth. She said that Daniel would have lived to see 150 years if the medicine of his time had been better, and his descendants would live even longer and healthier lives, and eventually in a few more generations they might live as long as her people did. Marcus was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "So he did wait for you, and she did not, Undi."